In Path of Exile, the Gauntlet provides the ultimate challenge. In the Searing world's hardcore solo self-found class Gauntlet is by far the most challenging Gauntlet we've ever had. So, which builds have thrived? Which builds overcame adversity? And which didn't make it? Normally, I go through and I have a decent selection of builds to look at. But in this case, I'm looking at all the level 94 to 98 characters in the Gauntlet, and there's only 42 of them. There isn't a single Berserker, Occultist, Gladiator, Hierophant, Guardian, Assassin, or Trickster. This doesn't mean that these ascendancies are necessarily bad. This means that this Gauntlet was absolutely that brutal. So, who did thrive? Who did survive? And what builds can be found that might not have been that expected? To the surprise of hopefully no one, some of the top builds, at least by popularity when combined with level, are Detonate Dead Ignite, Fizz Trapper, specifically Poison Fizz Trapper, and Explosive Arrow Champion. Although Explosive Arrow Champion in a lot of cases did not do nearly as well as either DD or Seismic Trap. But I'm sure you didn't come here for me to say Poison Seismic Trap, Ignite DD, and Explosive Arrow are good builds. So I want to look at some of the other things. Things that aren't getting the absolute most attention, but are still very solid and very successful. Starting with Fire Trap. Because yes, Fire Trap, like I predicted, did do really well in the Gauntlet. There's two examples here, one of which is a Fire Trap Inquisitor, the other of which is a Fire Trap Chieftain. The reason for Chieftain is you get a lot of Fizz defense pretty much for free from your Ascendancy, and it still has a pretty solid way to scale fire damage over time. So, looking at the Inquisitor first, we've got what I would say is a pretty basic setup here. There's nothing too fancy, there's nothing too special. We've got a 4-link RF, which certainly helps for clear. We've got a 5-link Fire Trap, and then using Infernal Cry to help boost the clear even more, since getting something like Legacy of Fury from Maven is a fool's errand. The nice thing about Inquisitor is you get a massive amount of recovery for free from the Ascendancy. And surprisingly, they're using a Doryani. This is something that I wouldn't really have expected, as usually when you get into that, you tend to run out of life before you run out of ES. Although, then again, maybe that's because they don't have that much max res. So in this case, it's really important to be able to split the damage they take between their life and their ES to make the most out of their recovery when dealing with the Righteous Fire damage. As you can see, they're going down here on the tree for their max res, and I believe they are running a Purity of Fire. So no melding of the flesh here, which makes sense because this is hardcore solo self-found. You're not going to be able to just get stuff like a melding. Oh, wait a minute. I stand corrected. There does not seem to be any purity. So we're just taking the fire damage to the face. Interesting. That does go to show you just how good Inquisitor is at dealing with damage over time. They're just absorbing the damage they deal to himself with Righteous Fire and not worrying about it, instead opting for Grace, which will make a significant difference while mapping. Next up, of course, the Chieftain. The Chieftain does not have any evasion rating really. I guess a little bit, 8,200 more with the Jade Flask active. In general though, the Chieftain's going to be taking a lot more hits and probably mitigating them a lot better, but with a little less recovery. I would also guess that this Chieftain is pure Fire Trap, no RF here. RF on a Chieftain would definitely cause a lot of issues, but in exchange, because we're not RF, we get to do things like summon Skitterbots, and you can see that the Fire Trap here has significantly higher damage over time. So, do I think that in a trade league, you should be playing RF Chieftain over RF Inquisitor? Honestly, no. But in the Gauntlet, yes, this is a very successful build that's doing really well. In fact, at level 96, it's one of the top builds for the Gauntlet. So, either RF Fire Trap Inquiz, or just straight up Fire Trap Chieftain is very much Gauntlet viable. Next, I want to highlight a build that's a little bit on the strange side, and that is a Spark Inquisitor in the Gauntlet. The reason this is strange is Spark performs really well while mapping, but tends to fall short while bossing. Again, we're leveraging Inquisitor because Inquisitor allows you a lot of versatility. You have amazing recovery, you have Consecrated Ground which can be used to mitigate curses, and you don't have to build Pen because you can deal with crit and just ignore it. But on the other hand, Inquisitor's weakness can be physical mitigation. This means you'll want armor gear, and you're going to want to pay attention to things like endurance charges Divine Shield if you can fit it in, and a lot of other things like that. In this case, the build's certainly living dangerously, because we're using Divine Blessing with Life Tap for Zealotry, a massive single target damage boost, but at a cost of nuking yourself down to really low life, so a simple careless move could be the end of your character. This is a build that does really, really well while mapping, and then starts to fall off and struggles heavily when you get into single target. Now I noticed that we've got both a Fractured Max Life and Fractured Crit multi-neck. Those are really nice, certainly great pickups for the Gauntlet. On top of that, everything else is about what I'd expect. Gearing for spell suppression makes sense, since bosses are going to be your major weakness. Gearing for max res, this shield was crafted with Rog, by the way. Rog is really good at rolling things like max fire, lightning, all. Amazing item. I would be happy to have this in a trade league. To have this in the Gauntlet is absolute insanity. So the Maelstrom Rock certainly carrying this build, and it probably makes it feel way better than it otherwise would. The fact that Inquisitor has so much raw recovery is also pretty decent. It certainly helps for things like dealing with damage over time effects, be it fizz or poison, which is, of course, one of the biggest concerns of this Gauntlet. This build isn't something I'd really advise playing in the Gauntlet. It worked really well for mapping, but I'd guess it fell short on single target, and so what you can do with it is a little bit limited in that regard. Next up, representing Toxic Rain, we have a Toxic Rain Pathfinder. That's right, Pathfinder, not Raider. This is interesting because Pathfinder has kind of been the slept-on ascendancy when it comes to Toxic Rain. A lot of the time, people just take a Raider. I don't really like this setup personally. My main problem here is we've got a 6-link Toxic Rain with an Empower that's mostly going to be your damage, and then we've got these Ballistas. Ballistas are really, really, really good for single target damage, but we have a problem. They're focused Ballista, so they only fire when you do. They're multi-totem support, meaning they do almost no damage, and they're Withering Touch. So, while this setup did have a lot of success, I'd be hesitant to ever recommend it. When you're playing Toxic Rain and you're using Ballistas, what this does is this forces you to only be doing this, and only really gaining benefits when you're attacking. So, you'll have your Mirage Archer going, but let's just say you have to run around and dodge a lot, then you're losing all of the damage that you could have had from your Ballistas, because you're using Focus Ballista. And all you really get for that is the ability to stack Withering Touch a little bit faster so that you don't have to use something like Withering Step. And I really don't think that trade-off's worth it. Also, given how fast you can throw out Ballistas, especially if you have any of the Ballista nodes, which in this case we don't, then I really think here the best thing to do would be to kind of swap this. Put Withering Touch over on your self-attack, completely drop the Focus Ballista and the multi-totems, and then you'd have a really strong 5-link that you can use for your single target, so you can focus more on dodging, and then for your clear you have something that's still pretty functional. Dropping the faster attacks might make it feel a little bit worse, or potentially you even drop the Vicious Projectiles if you have enough damage to get away with that. You'll end up with a build that feels a lot better. This is something that I've noticed people tend to do. I've been playing it the other way around ever since 3.15 because I found a ton of success in that league with that build, and hopefully slowly this is going to catch on. Nonetheless, this build is still super tanky. We've got good armor, good evasion, good life. They're covering well for the fact that normally Toxic Rain has pretty low recovery, and so abusing those life flasks is, of course, a really great choice. Got some Vol Molten Shell going on because living is good, and we're a Pathfinder, which means even more area of effect. So this was, overall, a solid performance from Toxic Rain. Next up, Melee is Not Viable, a Splitting Steel Champion. Steel skills are often given the reputation of being really good while leveling, but not viable for endgame. And if you're looking at big DPS numbers, I'm sure that's why they look that way. On the other hand, Slayer is a really good ascendancy right now. You have a lot of quality of life, you have a lot of damage, and you have really good flexibility. You can also see how we're able to take block really easily. We've got Overleech, which is going to feel amazing, and we've got damage, including Enhanced Cull and Pseudo Onslaught. So this is a Resolute Technique Iron Grip build. Basically, you're just throwing steel from a distance and watching things die. The really nice thing about Slayer is you get a lot of recovery, making it even better with Poacher's Mark, which makes a lot of sense here. I suppose we could have even potentially gone with some rage support in the main links. I could see that beating Cruelty depending on the gearing. We're going with spell suppression and block, so this character just doesn't take hits. We've got a solid amount of armor and a wee bit of evasion rating. And of course, we've got overleech, so everything feels better. Melee might not be the most Gauntlet viable choice, but splitting steel definitely turned out well in this case. But I wouldn't advise playing this in a trade league, as you're going to feel your damage fall off a lot. You won't die to anything, but a lot of the bosses won't die either. And finally, the last build that I wanted to look at is a Herald of Agony Juggernaut. That's right, Herald of Agony, the build from way back when, is back, and it's a thick boy. Here we have a Herald of Agony Jug using a Cold Iron Point and a Lionized Vision. Lionized Vision is a great choice because it basically 6-links your Herald of Agony without having to worry about getting an actual 6-link, so they have a huge advantage in terms of their damage over a lot of other players in the Gauntlet. We've got a Cold Iron Point, which is plus 3 levels. You don't really have to worry about the damage you're doing yourself. You're just going to be poisoning things, and all that matters is total hit count. That's why we've got the Stormbrand here with faster casting, life tap, and chance to poison. Doesn't matter how little damage you're doing, doesn't matter if you're doing no damage at all. Remember, it's just about hits to inflict as much poison as possible. Runebinder makes sense. We've got a big old tanky tree, good old Defiance banner coming in. We've got some determination going on, like with pretty much everyone. This build's a little bit low recovery, so we're using a Reckoning life gain on hit. I would assume it doesn't make all that much of a difference. If you really wanted life gain on hit, unfortunately you'd have to use something that multi-hits like Lancing Steel or Cyclone. But it's still better than nothing, and it does add much needed recovery, as this build isn't really going to be leeching, and your regen will only be so good. Though it should be noted, we are taking all the defensive ascendancies from Jug, since we don't need to deal damage ourselves, our Crawler's doing it for us. So yet again, this is a really solid build for the Gauntlet. In a trade league, could you pump up the damage, and could you actually clear maps efficiently with, say, Popson and Occultist? Probably. I just don't see this being something that people would play in a trade league. Or even in something like Trade Hardcore. For the Gauntlet though, where your main goal is, just don't die, well, the fact this was last fetched about 3 hours ago means they're very likely still alive, and at 9,000 life, with a lot of armor and just jug things, I don't think they're going to be dying anytime soon. If your goal is to survive the Gauntlet, then this is a great choice. Just think of a tortoise and the hare. The hare might get towards the finish line faster, but run out of gas part of the way through, whereas you're going to be nice, slow, steady, and safe on this kind of jug. So looking again at the level 95 to level 98 characters in Gauntlet, there really aren't that many of them. And as you can see, a lot of them are just the top skills. This makes sense because this Gauntlet was brutally punishing. I don't think we'll have a Gauntlet this difficult again for a very long time. One last thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is, not everyone on here is a streamer. In fact, there's quite a few names that aren't. And that's really cool to see. I feel like far too often people have this idea that streamers are the only good players in PoE. The reality is, there's a lot of really good PoE players that don't stream, that don't make content, and often just play the game quietly and almost anonymously in the corner because no one notices them. At least, no one notices them until an event like this Gauntlet, where people get their opportunity to really shine. And so now, I have a question for you. Did you participate in the Gauntlet, and if so, how far did you get? Or did you die to something and decide that maybe it was better to go back to normal PoE or play something else? I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, be sure to put them down in the comments below, or join the Discord where you can ask questions, get build help, and hang out with the community. A special thanks to my patrons and YouTube channel members. They're awesome, and they get to show it by having their name on screen in the credits of all my videos. So if you want to see your name here, be sure to check the link in the description. For more general gaming content, check out my second channel, 10 Gaming Thoughts, and if you want a water bottle or a cool shirt, I have a link to my official merch shop in the description. I hope you learned something today, and I hope to see you again sometime soon.